Shalom everyone, and welcome to another vlog by Danny the Digger. And this time I'm really excited, as this is going to be the beginning, a presentation of a whole new series devoted to one topic: following Jesus in Jerusalem. And yes, I apologize that the environment around me right now is a bit morbid. This is a Jewish cemetery, but it is on the western slopes of Mount of Olives. And this is the place where Jesus entered Jerusalem. This is the area where, according to the Gospels, Jesus enters Jerusalem, coming from Jericho, ascending up through the Judean desert, mounted on a back on a donkey at Bethphage. From here, he sees Jerusalem for the first sight. And what a view it must have been. What an amazing view it must have been for anyone coming here 2,000 years ago, and especially if you are a peasant coming from a small village in the Galilee and seeing this magnificent city. Yes, this magnificent city is recorded not only by Jewish sources, by Josephus, but even Roman sources like Pliny the Elder said that in the east, Jerusalem is by far the most beautiful city. Today what you see here is quite impressive, and especially famous is that landmark called the Dome of the Rock, sanctifying the Temple Mount by Islam as the place where Muhammad descended to heaven to get the prayers of Islam. But 2,000 years ago, something completely different stood here. The Jewish temple in full glory. A 50 meters high building, all in white, designed a bit like in Roman style, but following the descriptions of the Bible and how the first Solomon's temple used to look like. The main activity was, of course, in front of it, somewhere there, where an endless flow of animal sacrifice was being presented to please the Lord. And Jesus, coming from the east, coming from the desert, would see all of this and would be amazed. But actually, according to the Gospels, his first reaction is very negative. This chapel over here is called Dominus Flevit, where the Lord has wept. And yes, according to the Gospel of Luke, his reaction is actually very, very negative, as he predicts that the city will actually be destroyed. A prophecy that was indeed fulfilled about 30 years after Jesus himself was put to death here. But after he reaches Jerusalem, the New Testament tells us that he goes up to the temple. Yes, imagine him walking around here, arguing with the Pharisees, turning the tables of the money changers and the dove sellers. But I believe that before he could go up to the temple, he must have gone into one of the public ritual baths. And there are two options in the city at that time. One at the southern end is called the Pool of Siloam. The Gospel of John records Jesus going there, but performing a miracle. And another complex at the northern side of the Temple Mount is known as the Pools of Beth Chisda. And again, the Gospel of John records Jesus going there, but performing a miracle. That miracle may have happened, but I believe that Jesus also used the opportunity to immerse himself, to immerse his body, so he too could go up to the temple itself. And what did the temple all look like? Well, we have the writings of Josephus, we have the writings of the Mishnah. The New Testament also provides a few details. And there is also archaeology. So my next chapter is actually going to be a presentation of a model of Jerusalem, a 1:50 scale model of Jerusalem in the time of Jesus, in the first century. But following the events, the locations mentioned in the Gospels in Jerusalem, after immersing his body, after going up to the temple, the nights he will spend at Bethany, which cannot be seen here, and I'm not sure I will be able to film there because now it's under Palestinian control, but it's right over the edge of the top of Mount of Olives. But eventually, as Pesach, Passover, is coming soon, he will come with his disciples and they will decide to conduct a Seder night. A Seder night which is practiced by Jews to this day, but Christianity labels it as the Last Supper. It was taken place in Jerusalem, somewhere in a building on the second floor, which Christianity later identified on Mount Zion. at that location. And during that event, Jesus says that the unleavened bread, the wine they're having, is also a symbol of his soon-to-be sacrifice, which are puzzled by what is he talking about, but it will all become clear later on. And after that long night of wine and singing and dining, they decide to withdraw out from the city, but not go all the way to Bethany. They go down to the valley, and across the valley, somewhere around there, they will stay at the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane was also identified, and actually you can see here the corner of a big Catholic church, which was built over the place believed to be where Jesus withdrew a stone throw away and lamented, cried over his fate, his future. A very surprising subject, because it's all meant to be. But yes, it's apparently the earthly side of Jesus expressing himself, saying to God, please pass this cup away from me, and sweating and crying over the rock. That rock today is known as the Rock of Agony, and the church built over it is marking that sacred place. The event will not take place for too long, because then the priests, who were pretty upset at him for expressing his anger at their corruption, turning the tables of money changers and dove sellers. What is it all about? Well, again, to be a good Jew back then, you had to do a few things before you went up to the temple. And I'll handle the gimbal back to my son. This is a time to thank you, Shaked, for helping me out in doing this presentation. Before you could go up to the temple, you had to do three things. You had to purify, we mentioned that, but you also had to have just the right coin that you could give up in the temple. And this is a replica of such a coin. These coins were called shekels, and in ordinary times they were minted by only one authoritative mint, the mint of Tyre. I actually, as a student of archaeology, cataloged many of them, hoping it to be my PhD. Never completed that. And the replica of the coin that I showed you now is called a rebellion shekel. It was minted when the Jews rebelled. The important thing is that the priest would only accept that specific currency. Your dollars, your drachma, your dinars, they're irrelevant for the temple treasury. And guess what? If you need to change the money to that specific currency, the priests were operating the money changers, and the exchange rate was outrageous. Secondly, you also had to bring an animal sacrifice, and you could carry it all the way from New York if you want, or Alexandria, but most of the people would purchase them just before the entry, and that would be somewhere probably there at the southern steps in the Southern Wall Archaeological Park. Yes, we will review also that site in much greater detail, but again, it was probably the priests who were operating the booths where the pigeons were being sold, and again, surprise, surprise, for an outrageous price. So Jesus turning the tables of the money changers and the dove sellers may have gotten the public liking him, but the priests upset at him. And at Gethsemane, they would get even with him. After that long night of drinking, they were all tired. They went into an abandoned olive press in what's called the Garden of Gethsemane, and the priests would come and capture him. With the support of Judas, they would identify him, take him into custody, and drag him back into the city, back to the site where he was interrogated by the high priest and the Sanhedrin. And there are several traditions over this location. The Catholics believe that happened somewhere under the sun right now at a site called Petrus in Gallicanto, the place where Peter denied Jesus. The Armenians hold another opinion, that it is on the horizon level more or less today, somewhere on Mount Zion, a place which to this day is not officially open to the public, but I hope to butter up the guard there, the Armenian guard, which I know when he will let me film there as well. But there is a third possibility, a third one that was discovered in the 1970s inside the Jewish quarter, where a big structure was found from the 1st century. In my opinion, following what the archaeologists already speculated, maybe that is where Jesus was really interrogated, and wait till I get to film there, because that is not an official opinion or a sacred place by anyone, but in my humble opinion as an archaeologist, that is the best candidate. Stay tuned for that specific chapter. Anyway, after he is interrogated by the high priest, he is sent over to the governor, Pontius Pilatus, and the place of the trial is labeled in the New Testament as the Praetorium. Unfortunately, none of the other sources mention a place called Praetorium, but there is a tradition placing it just north of the Temple Mount. Let me take the gimbal again, and that is today identified just north of the Temple Mount, and that is where the Catholic processions begin their Friday processions from the place of the trial to the place of crucifixion. There is another opinion that the place of the trial may have been somewhere in where Jaffa Gate of today is located, or next to it where Herod's palace used to stand. I personally think that actually the medieval tradition of the trial at the Antonia makes more sense for reasons I will present in detail when we film there. But one thing is for sure, after he is sentenced to death, he is given the tool of his execution, the cross, to carry by himself, and he is taken outside the city to a site called Golgotha. Golgotha, which means in Aramaic something like skull. Is it then Skull Hill? Was it shaped like a skull? Maybe a lot of people were buried around there. By the way, the place where I'm filming right now is definitely a place of a lot of burials, but this is of Jews from the last 200 or 300 years ago. The Jews still believe that the Messiah is yet to come. And that's why they are buried here, because they also have a firm belief he will appear here on Mount of Zion. It's interesting that the same place where Christianity records Jesus appearing, the Jews still believe that Messiah is yet to come, but at the same location. And frankly, there are a lot of Christians believe that when Jesus will return, it will also be here. So whenever the Messiah arrives, it will be very interesting to find out, to ask him, hey Messiah, is this your first time or are you returning? Then maybe we'll know if the Christian or the Jewish version is indeed the one that got it right. But anyway, back to a more serious note, the place of the trial, the Antonia, the Praetorium is where Jesus is trialed, and the execution is at the site called Golgotha. Golgotha would be identified centuries later, and today it is just to the right of the Dome of the Rock. I hope I pointed with my finger to the right location where there is a pretty big gray dome. Let me actually zoom in a bit. Here we go. Okay, right there, more or less. That is the place where in the 4th century, Helena Augusta, the empress, identified the place where Jesus was put to death and where he was buried. And that is known today as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now I must say that not everyone agrees with that location, and especially the Protestants, to a great degree also the Mormons, argue for an alternative location called the Garden Tomb. Kind of hard to point to it from here. I will definitely review those two places. Again, as an archaeologist, I have my opinion, and in this case I think the Holy Sepulchre is probably a better candidate. But wait till we review it, review the archaeological evidence that leads me to reach such a conclusion. So we have the site of the crucifixion, we have the site of the burial. 3 days later, the tomb is found empty. How come it is empty? He rose from the dead, of course, and he appears to his disciples. He appears to them in what tradition argues is a specific location on Mount Zion, and then he escapes out of Jerusalem. The Gospel of Luke records him appearing at Emmaus, and then in the Galilee, he sees the disciples, he meets them, he invites them for some grilled fish, and he appoints Peter. At 10 my lamb, he tells them, appointing him to the prime disciple, to the first pope from a Catholic point of view. But the book of Acts tells us that at the end, he's back here. He's back here on Mount of Zion, on Mount of Olives, and he ascends back to the heavens. That location is identified where these top of church towers are, the Chapel of the Ascension. that will be the last chapter in my vlog, following Jesus in Jerusalem. But how did Jerusalem look like in the first century? Okay, trying to place first century Jerusalem over the 20th or 21st century Jerusalem is kind of a challenge, and especially it requires a lot of imagination. But we do have a good educational tool to try and visualize this, a 1:50 scale model of Jerusalem from the first century. So stay tuned for my next chapter, which will review that model and present all of these sites on the model itself, and then we will start going site by site from Bethphage and Mount of Olives to the Chapel of the Ascension. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, to like, and I love your comments. I love your feedback. It gives me the incentive to keep making such videos. So stay tuned for the next one. Litraot.